Today, we are going to explore Stoicism. It is a vast subject rooted in the ancient world, more precisely during the 3rd century before Christ. It is a philosophical movement that emerged in the wake of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and which has passed through the centuries while transforming considerably, sometimes even becoming distorted along the way. Addressing such a broad school of thought is always a delicate exercise because the real challenge lies in knowing where to begin. The difficulty is even greater because Stoicism represents what one could call a complete philosophy. Complete in the sense that it goes far beyond the framework of a simple intellectual system meant to interpret reality. It is both a speculative philosophy and a practical philosophy. It is a form of thought directed as much toward knowledge as toward action within the real world, and therefore addresses first and foremost each individual person. We will rely on a few quotations that I will recall from memory, since this video has not been rigorously prepared. I prefer to speak freely, sketch a few paths of reflection, and allow each person to take from it whatever resonates with them and deepen it further on their own. What lies within our power and what lies beyond it? I would like to begin with a first principle that is often quoted to summarize the essence of Stoicism, namely this: some things depend on us and others do not. The Stoic conception of the world therefore rests immediately upon a fundamental distinction, a distinction we must integrate if we wish to understand our limits as human beings and our limits as unique individuals. Certain things do indeed fall within our control. It is up to me to make efforts in order to succeed. It is up to me to seek truth. It is up to me to behave virtuously. On the other hand, it is not up to me to be tall, strong, or powerful. It is not up to me to be beautiful. It is not up to me to choose the place of my birth. We can therefore quite naturally grasp what the Stoics are trying to tell us. There is what we receive as inheritance, and there is what we build through our own will. Of course, one could always object that this boundary remains difficult to define precisely. The Stoics claim, for instance, that wealth does not depend on us, yet one could easily argue the opposite. If I deliberately direct my efforts toward financial and material success, I considerably increase my chances of prospering rather than remaining passive. There will therefore always be particular cases in which the dividing line between what depends on us and what does not remains open to debate. Yet in its broad orientation, the idea remains perfectly understandable. Becoming aware of this distinction between what belongs to us and what surpasses us is, for the Stoics, only a first step. It is the entrance into awareness of our own boundaries, the recognition that we cannot control everything, that we are fundamentally finite beings. Seen from this angle, Stoic philosophy resembles an invitation to humility, a humility that is nothing other than the lucid acceptance of our powerlessness and our mortal condition. The same idea can be expressed in reverse. If I nourish aspirations, desires, or ambitions that greatly exceed my abilities, I will inevitably collide with my own limits. I will not be able to obtain everything I crave, and faced with the obstacles standing in the way of my desires, I run the risk of falling into unhappiness. Put simply, whoever desires the impossible exposes themselves to suffering. They suffer because they eventually realize that what lies beyond their reach will, by definition, remain inaccessible to them. All of this may seem astonishingly trivial. One may wonder whether it truly counts as philosophy to claim that the impossible is impossible. It's almost a tautology. Yet if the Stoics consider it necessary to remind us of this, it is precisely because in our daily lives, in our concrete behavior, we constantly tend to forget it. We willingly imagine that certain things depend on us, when in reality they entirely escape us. And to illustrate their point, the Stoics rely on striking examples. First example: I understand that my existence is limited, that my presence on this earth necessarily has a finite duration, and in fact, every human being without exception is subject to this same limit. Therefore, when someone disappears, even someone to whom I was deeply attached, even someone I loved, I must consent to their loss. I must consent to their death, because to be born, to pass through existence, and to die is the very essence of the human condition. Allowing oneself to be overwhelmed by grief at the death of a loved one constitutes, in the eyes of the Stoics, a logical absurdity. And indeed, it is a logical absurdity. It is simply impossible for me to make those I love eternal. This is an inescapable reality. This first limit inscribed in human nature, death, in other words, the temporal boundary of our existence, must not merely be understood intellectually, it must be accepted deeply. And this is where we discover something decisive within Stoicism. Understanding something, becoming conscious of it, does not simply mean knowing that it exists, it means welcoming it into the deepest part of oneself, even into one's own flesh. At this point, it becomes clear that Stoic philosophy is not a form of pure abstract speculation, but a philosophy that engages one's entire life. It is both a discipline of thought and a lived psychology. Our existence is not endless, and we must consent to death, beginning with our own. Epicurus used to say, "Learning to live means learning to die," and all philosophy is nothing more than this gradual work of becoming familiar with death. But the point is not to welcome it as something painful or tragic. The point is to welcome it as a necessity, to integrate it as one of the fundamental laws of nature. And it is only when we truly accept it deeply as a natural law that we can free ourselves from the sadness, grief, and suffering that this prospect usually provokes. If you try, at this very precise moment, to imagine the circumstances of your death, at what age, in what place, in what manner, natural death, in your sleep, a car accident, a serious illness, you will immediately notice a wave of anxiety rising within you. And for the Stoics, this anxiety is proof that you have not yet truly integrated the idea of death.
Moreover, one frequently finds, both among the Stoics and the Epicureans, the following statement: death is nothing. Death is nothing. Why? Because as long as we are alive, death is absent. And once we die, we are no longer there to experience anything at all. In the end, we never truly encounter death. It carries us away in such a sudden instant that we do not even have time to perceive it. The anxiety of death is therefore not the anxiety of a lived reality. It is the anxiety of a mental construction. And this is where we move a little closer to the heart of Stoic philosophy. This central role of imaginary projection, which constantly keeps us distant from our immediate reality. We are never fully rooted in the present moment, so to speak. We endlessly oscillate between anticipation of what is coming and nostalgia for what has passed, without ever truly inhabiting the moment that is here. The trap of these projections is that they generate within us emotions that the Stoics called passions. This was in fact the ancient vocabulary for what we now call emotions. In Greek, passion is called pathos, and pathos means suffering. Passion is what leaves us powerless, what we endure without being able to resist it. Fear, regret, jealousy, envy, anger, all of these belong to the realm of emotions, all of them belong to the realm of passions. But above all, they are constructions produced by our own mind. And this is precisely the proof that we refuse to welcome existence as it presents itself to us. I mentioned the anxiety of death, but the possible examples are countless. Take jealousy towards someone close to you. Jealousy because they drive a more luxurious car, because they have a more attractive partner, happier children, whatever the reason may be. This jealousy, at its core, is nothing more than a projection created by my own mind. In other words, if that neighbor did not possess what I lack, I would feel no unhappiness whatsoever. Therefore, it is only because they possess what I do not have that this frustration arises within me and takes the form of jealousy. But in this situation, they are not the guilty party. I am. I am the one allowing this thought and the emotions flowing from it to invade my inner space and dominate my emotional balance. I alone am responsible for it, and it lies entirely within me. We therefore arrive at this fundamental Stoic conviction. I must not allow myself to be disturbed by what lies beyond my control. That is the principle. First observation, then. Some things belong to me, while others escape me. Second observation. I must not allow myself to be affected by what does not depend on me. Earlier, I emphasized that fear of death represented, in the eyes of the Stoics, a logical absurdity. But in reality, for the Stoics, every emotion, without exception, is a logical absurdity. The reason is simple. No emotion ever solves the problem from which it arises. And the truth, according to the Stoics, is that the true source of our emotions is ourselves. Yet our instinctive reflex is to place responsibility for our emotions onto something external. If I am angry, it is not my fault. The other person provoked me. The other person irritated me. For the Stoics, this reasoning is completely invalid. If we are angry, it is because we failed to govern our own reactions, and the other person merely serves as a convenient excuse to explain our anger. In other words, to conceal our inability to master ourselves. Our emotions belong to us, and we are entirely responsible for them. The proof is that certain people manage remarkably well to regulate their emotional life. There are individuals capable of enduring external hardships without allowing themselves to be swallowed by them, even when those hardships seem particularly severe and painful. And precisely those people are described as Stoic. Stoic, in ordinary language, refers to someone impassive, free from passions. It is a form of detachment, but a detachment that has nothing to do with insensitivity or ignorance. Quite the opposite. It is a deliberate detachment, a consciously chosen detachment, expressing the lucid awareness that there are realities over which we have absolutely no control. And the Stoics challenge us with this question. What is the point of allowing yourself to be consumed by what does not depend on you? It changes nothing about the root of the problem. Anger will not erase the causes of anger. Jealousy will not remove the reasons of jealousy. For the Stoics, emotions resemble the heat released by an energy we are incapable of containing and directing. We feel compelled to release it in the form of emotion, yet this release solves nothing. If I hit my knee against the corner of my coffee table, I may curse the furniture or strike it, but my pain will not be relieved because of it, although perhaps it will at least allow me to release the energy generated by the pain and by the anger it provokes. If I watch a televised debate whose main guest infuriates me, I may insult them and throw my remote control at the screen, but the situation will remain exactly the same. What the Stoics teach us, therefore, is that surrendering to emotion serves no purpose, and that by yielding to our emotions, we are actually concealing our refusal to accept the world in its raw reality. This is why another Stoic formula invites us to do the following. Do not seek to change reality, but change the way you look at it. Now, of course, one could say, but what kind of philosophy is this? A philosophy of resignation, a philosophy of passivity. And this reaction is understandable. If I accept everything, it seems like a form of surrender, as though I must tolerate injustice, accept being lied to, robbed, betrayed, the immorality of my neighbor, because the Stoics claim that if I reject these things, I fall into irrationality. Yes and no. Do not forget that the Stoics distinguish between what depends on me and what does not. There are things over which I can exercise control, and the Stoics clearly remind us, give me the strength to change what can be changed.
So the first difficulty lies in identifying what can truly be changed and then acting at my own level on what depends on me. But I must not nourish ambitions that exceed my means. I must not believe that I can overturn the entire world alone with my limited resources. I must accept that the changes I am capable of producing, the transformations I am capable of accomplishing in the world, will remain proportional to my abilities. In other words, relatively modest compared to the immensity of the world. But I still have a choice between doing what lies within my reach and giving up while telling myself, after all, it is pointless. I have that choice. I can decide to renounce everything and ask myself, what is the point? Yet in that situation, according to the Stoics, I am no longer doing what depends on me. I am giving up, surrendering, walking away. But why? Because I refuse to accept the idea that I do not possess greater control over the world. In truth, I renounce out of pride. I renounce because I convince myself that on my own I will never be capable of producing the changes I would like to see emerge. Fine, but that reasoning is governed by the ego, by emotion, by the desire of absolute power. And for the Stoics, this remains an illusion. So the Stoics encourage us to act only within the sphere where we truly possess power, without tormenting ourselves over the rest. We do not worry about the rest because it does not belong to us, because it belongs to the world, and the world continues moving forward without us. We are part of the world, we leave our mark upon it, but we are not its owners. It belongs to us individually to accomplish what we are capable of accomplishing. It does not belong to us individually to act in the place of others.
Thus, rather than calling it a philosophy of resignation, I would speak instead of a philosophy of lucidity. I believe, and this remains here a strictly personal opinion, that the people who accomplish great things are those who do not obsess over what they are incapable of doing. These are people focused exclusively on what they can genuinely accomplish. Nourishing dreams that are impossible to attain is the best way never to bring a single one of them into reality. Desiring the impossible is the surest way to remain paralyzed in inaction, therefore in passivity, and consequently in the frustration that inevitably accompanies such passivity. Stoic philosophy is a practical philosophy because it pushes us to bring our actions into alignment with our thoughts. Earlier, we said that if I live within emotions such as anger, jealousy, or resentment, then my actions will inevitably carry the imprint of those emotions. Conversely, if I act with enthusiasm, if I act within a form of lightness, of unconditional joy, a joy that requires no justification, then, according to the Stoics, I become far freer because I no longer depend upon my emotions, because I no longer depend upon unrealistic ambitions, because I no longer depend upon illusion. For the Stoics, our emotions turn us into slaves. This is an extremely clear idea in their philosophy. Our emotions prevent us from perceiving and understanding reality as it truly is. They are like a filter placed between ourselves and reality, a filter that inevitably distorts that reality in our eyes. If I begin from the principle that the world existed before me and will continue existing after me, then on one hand, this relativizes my ability to act upon and transform the world. But that does not mean I am incapable of acting, it simply means that I am aware of the limits within which I am able to intervene. Emotions enslave us because, by definition, we do not choose to feel emotions. In reality, for the Stoics, it would be more accurate to say that we undergo our emotions because we do not make the necessary efforts to learn how to master them. One could therefore ask, but what kind of philosophy is this? A philosophy of acceptance? A philosophy of passivity? And that impression may seem entirely legitimate. If I accept everything, it creates the impression of surrender, as though I must endure injustice, accept being deceived, robbed, manipulated, accept the immorality of others, simply because the Stoics claim that refusing such things would amount to falling into irrationality. Yes and no. One must not forget that the Stoics distinguish between what belongs to me and what escapes my control.
Certain things depend upon me, and the Stoics clearly remind us, give me the strength to change what can be changed. The first difficulty, therefore, consists in discerning what can truly be transformed and then acting, at my own level, on what genuinely depends upon me. But I must not nourish ambitions that exceed my abilities. I must not believe that I single-handedly can transform the entire world with my limited means. I must understand that the changes I am able to produce, the transformations I can bring into the world, will always remain proportional to my abilities. In other words, relatively modest compared to the immensity of reality. But I still possess the choice between accomplishing what lies within my reach and giving up while telling myself, after all, it is pointless. I possess that choice. I can decide to renounce everything and ask myself, what is the point? Yet in such a situation, according to the Stoics, I no longer do what depends upon me. I give up, I surrender, I walk away. But why? Because I reject the idea that I do not possess greater control over the world. In truth, I renounce out of pride. I renounce because I convince myself that on my own, I will never be capable of producing the changes I would like to witness. Very well, but that reasoning is ruled by ego, by emotion, by the desire of omnipotence. And for the Stoics, this remains an illusion. Thus, the Stoics invite us to act solely within the sphere where we possess genuine power, without tormenting ourselves over the rest. We do not concern ourselves with the rest because it does not belong to us, because it belongs to the world, and because the world continues along its course without us. We are part of the world, we leave our imprint upon it, but we are not its owners. It belongs to us as individuals to accomplish what we are capable of accomplishing. It does not belong to us individually to act in place of others. Thus, rather than describing it as a philosophy of resignation, I would speak instead of a philosophy of lucidity. I believe, and this remains here a strictly personal opinion, that the people who accomplish great things are those who do not obsess over what they are incapable of achieving. These are people focused solely on what they can genuinely accomplish. Feeding dreams that are impossible to attain is the best way never to bring a single one of them into reality. Desiring the impossible is the surest way to remain trapped in inaction, therefore in passivity, and consequently in the frustration that inevitably accompanies such passivity. Stoic philosophy is a concrete philosophy because it pushes us to bring our actions into harmony with our thoughts. Earlier, we said that if I live within emotions such as anger, jealousy, or resentment, then my actions will inevitably bear the mark of those emotions. Conversely, if I act with enthusiasm, if I act within a form of lightness, of unconditional joy, a joy that does not require justification, then, according to the Stoics, I become far freer, because I no longer depend upon my emotions, because I no longer depend upon unrealistic ambitions, because I no longer depend upon illusion. For the Stoics, our emotions turn us into slaves. This is an absolutely central idea within their philosophy. Our emotions prevent us from seeing and understanding reality as it truly is. They function like a filter placed between ourselves and the real world, a filter that inevitably distorts reality in our eyes. If I begin from the principle that the world existed before me and will continue existing after me, then in a certain sense, this relativizes my ability to act upon and transform the world. But this does not mean that I am incapable of acting. It simply means that I am conscious of the limits within which I am able to intervene. Emotions enslave us because, by definition, we do not choose to experience emotions. In reality, for the Stoics, it would be more accurate to say that we undergo our emotions because we fail to make the necessary efforts required to learn how to master them. For the Stoics, happiness absolutely does not correspond to the satisfaction of desires. For them, satisfying one's desires actually represents the opposite of happiness. So if you have followed me up to this point, you should already understand why. Happiness would be the opposite of satisfying desire. Yes, because desire is precisely something that does not depend upon us. Desire is a condition that inhabits us, a condition that can become almost physical and which expresses the absence of an external object. By definition, I desire what I do not possess. But the very moment I desire it, I demonstrate that I depend upon that object, or more precisely, that my happiness depends upon it. I therefore spontaneously associate my
Stoic philosophy is a concrete philosophy because it pushes us to bring our actions into harmony with our thoughts. Earlier, we said that if I live within emotions such as anger, jealousy, or resentment, then my actions will inevitably bear the mark of those emotions. Conversely, if I act with enthusiasm, if I act within a form of lightness, of unconditional joy, a joy that does not require justification, then, according to the Stoics, I become far freer, because I no longer depend upon my emotions, because I no longer depend upon unrealistic ambitions, because I no longer depend upon illusion. For the Stoics, our emotions turn us into slaves. This is an absolutely central idea within their philosophy. Our emotions prevent us from seeing and understanding reality as it truly is. They function like a filter placed between ourselves and the real world, a filter that inevitably distorts reality in our eyes. If I begin from the principle that the world existed before me and will continue existing after me, then in a certain sense, this relativizes my ability to act upon and transform the world. But this does not mean that I am incapable of acting. It simply means that I am conscious of the limits within which I am able to intervene. Emotions enslave us because, by definition, we do not choose to experience emotions. In reality, for the Stoics, it would be more accurate to say that we undergo our emotions because we fail to make the necessary efforts required to learn how to master them. For the Stoics, happiness absolutely does not correspond to the satisfaction of desires. For them, satisfying one's desires actually represents the opposite of happiness. So if you have followed me up to this point, you should already understand why. Happiness would be the opposite of satisfying desire. Yes, because desire is precisely something that does not depend upon us. Desire is a condition that inhabits us, a condition that can become almost physical and which expresses the absence of an external object. By definition, I desire what I do not possess. But the very moment I desire it, I demonstrate that I depend upon that object, or more precisely, that my happiness depends upon it. I therefore spontaneously associate my happiness with obtaining what I desire. For the Stoics, this constitutes a complete illusion. And besides, each person can experience this directly for themselves. If you desire something, a cigarette for example, like me at this very moment, then you are going to smoke it, and once it is finished, it will not take very long before you begin wanting the next one. Thus, you will not have eliminated your desire, in the sense that you will never have satisfied it permanently. Therefore, the cigarette I am smoking right now does not make me happy. It calms a desire, it temporarily fills a lack, but that lack will inevitably return after some time. Consequently, happiness does not consist in obtaining what one desires. Happiness consists in no longer depending upon one's desires. Happiness means no longer desiring. I desire something whenever I feel a lack, necessarily. Once that lack disappears, once I am completely fulfilled, then I cease desiring. One can be happy in sickness, happy in solitude, and even happy in the midst of physical suffering. Moreover, this reminds me of another quotation from Epictetus. Epictetus was a slave because certain slaves were Stoics. And you might say, obviously, it was probably better to be Stoic when one was a slave, since it likely helped one endure such a condition. That is true. But there were also Stoic emperors, such as Marcus Aurelius, for example. At one point, Epictetus recounts an anecdote. He explained that a man was attempting to break his arm by twisting it violently in a lock, and he supposedly said, "You are eventually going to break my arm." Then his arm finally broke, and he simply replied, "Well, I told you that you would." It is a rather amusing anecdote illustrating the fact that the accomplished Stoic is the one who remains within pure observation, without emotion, and without any display of suffering.
So yes, one may consider this an extremely difficult ideal to attain, but it must nevertheless be acknowledged that certain human beings in our own era succeed in reaching this sort of state, those we call yogis, capable of enduring absolutely unbearable pain through a profound detachment of the mind. The Stoics indeed recommended this sort of practice, particularly meditation, which represents a path towards wisdom insofar as it teaches us to focus upon our consciousness rather than upon our body. I will now attempt to conclude. The Stoics explain to us that there are things that depend upon us and things that do not, and that it depends entirely upon us to stop being dependent upon what escapes us. For the Stoics, the universe obeys laws, inflexible laws, which you could call the laws of fate. Yet within Stoicism, fate carries no negative connotation. In fact, if we wish to be honest, it is mainly within modern societies that fate is perceived negatively, since people often assume that if fate exists, then free will no longer exists. However, for the Stoics, this is absolutely not the case. Free will truly exists for them in the sense that it depends upon us not to allow ourselves to be affected, not to allow ourselves to be disturbed by the relentless necessity governing the world. It depends solely upon us to be happy in the situation that is ours. This does not mean that we must become passive in face of existence, in face of events. It simply means that we must demonstrate discernment and lucidity regarding what can be changed, the reasons for changing what ought to be changed, and the means employed in order to achieve it. Stoicism is a concrete philosophy. Moreover, today, Stoicism has largely transformed into techniques of self-development. I have nothing against these self-development methods. I simply think they represent only a superficial dimension of something far deeper, a complete philosophy. One cannot merely retain the practical aspect of Stoic philosophy and pretend that this alone is sufficient. No, because for the Stoics, this ability to master our emotions, this ability to become the captain of the ship of our existence, can only result from a genuine effort to understand the world. Understanding the world does not necessarily mean accepting it, yet it is impossible to accept it without first trying to understand it. Understanding the world means understanding that what happens possesses reasons for happening, and that what exists remains the only true arbiter. I may personally regret a situation, but that situation nevertheless possesses a reason for existing. And it doesn't matter whether I immediately understand its meaning or its causes. That situation exists, and I can only accept it. There is no point resisting what is inevitable. There is no point becoming angry because it is raining or because it is cold. It changes absolutely nothing. Although, if I become angry, perhaps I can at least warm myself up a little, and that is already something. But if I accept what initially appears unpleasant to me, then gradually it ceases to feel unpleasant at all. Personally, I make extensive use of Stoicism whenever I read the comments beneath my videos. I simply tell myself, well, there must be a reason for this, therefore I accept it. Stoicism is extremely practical, and above all, it is a philosophy that acts directly upon us whenever we read certain fragments of it. I sincerely recommend reading the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. You will notice as the reading progresses that a strange sensation of calm slowly begins to emerge, as though the logical and relentless evidence of what you are reading were rebalancing you internally, deeply realigning you within yourself.